Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today I am coming at you guys with another legendary creature from War of the Spark. And this one in particular was one I was super underwhelmed with when I first saw it. And after further evaluation, I'm actually really excited about this card, and that's Roalesk Apex Hybrid. So Roalesk is 2 green, green, and blue. And it's a legendary creature, human mutant flying crab thingy. I'm not really sure what it's got going on, but it looks cool. I like the art. And it has a very strange and sort of unique effect. For that 5 mana, it's a 4/5 flying trampler. And for all this, it has both an ETB effect and a dies trigger. So when it enters the battlefield, you can put 2+1/+1 counters on another target creature. And then when it dies, you get to proliferate twice. Now, the reason when I saw this that I was super underwhelmed was commanders with die triggers are super hard to use. Elenda was a previous commander that had a die trigger, but at least in black and white, those colors are super good with reanimation, specifically black, so letting it die might not have been too bad. But with this guy, you really don't want to let this Simic commander go to the graveyard. That you may not be able to get it back. You have stuff like Reclaim and stuff to put it, back on top of your library, but it's risky, and you're risking it, and the fact that you need to let it die, it was disappointing. But that was all until I realized why they did that. Because any type of leave the battlefield trigger with this would be extremely broken, and even the way this is phrased, it can still be pretty broken. Really, the point of this deck is to take advantage of these proliferate triggers, fill our creatures with +1 counters, fill our cards with other types of counters that I'm going to get into, and really, really be able to profit off of this commander's really cool ability. So, how are we going to take advantage of this die trigger? Well, the best way to do it, in my opinion, is with cloning effects. Now, you're going to see this as I go through the deck, but obviously a legendary creature, so why would you want to clone this legendary creature? Well, the way the legend rule works, that clone will still enter the battlefield, so you're still going to get those +1 counters placed, and it's immediately thrown to the graveyard, which does count as dying, so you also get that die trigger. So you're going to get both of those triggers whenever you make a clone. Now, I realize that, whatever mana you're paying for the clone might not always seem worth it to proliferate twice and put some counters, but that in combination with all the counters we're already going to have out, when we keep on proliferating like that, it's going to be more than worth it. So taking a look at the creatures, I mentioned we're taking advantage of counters, and really, these creatures are going to represent really everything the deck wants to do. The variety of the deck really does shine in the creatures. So, when I mentioned +1 counters, that's a type of counter. Prime Speaker Zagana is a perfect example of one of the best ways to take advantage of this. With our commander, you're able to just place +1 counters. So you are going to have a good chance of having just a big buffed creature. You throw in a Prime Speaker Zagana who's getting all these +1 counters, that card draw can be game winning. So, I also mentioned cloning effects. Progenitor Mimic, it doesn't seem like it'd be good in this deck, but it is so powerful, and it works almost like a better Atraxa if you can get it online, which sounds ridiculous. But essentially, you make it a copy of your commander, just let your commander go away, it can go back to the command zone so you don't have to worry about it dying. You have this copy of your commander on the battlefield, and every upkeep, you're getting another clone of it. Now, obviously, the legendary rule, that clone's going to go away, but that's not the important part. That literally means every upkeep, you're placing 2 +1 counters and proliferating twice. Again, proliferation, there's no limit on how many things you can proliferate. So once you start building a board presence, proliferating twice, you can just start gaining so much advantage that it can just overwhelm your opponents. Now, so I've already mentioned with these clones, we're going to take advantage of just a lot of proliferation. There's a lot of +1 counter synergies that you're going to see in Simic. But there's something else. With the word proliferate, you got to have some infect. If you don't have infect, you're just missing out. So the way I'm building this deck is I'm throwing probably, in the range of 3 to 5 infect cards. But with play testing, I am going to try different variations to see what that sweet spot is. But the one that you want no matter what is Blighted Agent. Blighted Agent is perfect for this deck because it's unblockable. And the reason that's important is if you can get this Blighted Agent and just get 1 poison counter on as many opponents as you can, we proliferate so much with the cloning effects of this commander and just this commander in general that 1 poison counter is going to get to 10 so fast. So my favorite way to use infect is really if you know that there's a troublesome deck at the table that you're really going to have just a problem with, it's going to be a bad matchup for you, you use that infect to just target that player, and in this deck, proliferate until they are poisoned out. So yeah, so when it comes to the creatures, those are really the three main types. We're going to have +1 counters, random counters, and then clones, so we can just get this engine going and going. We're going to move on to the sorceries, and this first one is just wow in this deck. It's Rite of Replication, and it's just so funny how differently this card is going to work. In Commander, a lot of the time, just having a bunch of big creatures, especially with a card like this, if they don't have haste, it's not going to win you the game. But when you are getting ETBs and die triggers with this, you're going to get the 5 clones, and they're all going to enter the battlefield. And if you have, when you have your Commander out, you don't want to let it die. Those 5 clones are immediately going to die. That's 10 proliferation triggers. Oh, that's so much. Again, you get to infect. If they had 1 poison counter, they're done. If you had any type of stuff with counters on it, whether it's something like the smallest creature, if you had a couple +1 counters, that immediately goes to 10 +1 counters. And that's literally thinking small. Like, this is just wow. Obviously, this is a really strong card in a lot of decks, but I really love how it interacts in a strange way with our Commander that wouldn't seem great at first because of the legend rule, but we do get a lot of value for that mana we spend. The next one I'm going to mention is Quasi-Duplicate. This is a really cool card because I love the fact that you essentially get to cast it twice. And again, it's only 3 mana, so we're going to get that 2 +1 counter double proliferate effect for 3 mana. And a lot of times the one-off stuff can be not as useful. Again, when we're casting these clones, they're immediately dying due to the legend rule. So to be able to have things that we can repeat allows us to get that recurring value. And again, spending 3 mana to get double proliferation and some +1 counters, with a lot of interactions can be broken. Taking a look at the instance, really the only one I do want to talk about is Inspiring Call. This card is just super powerful, and especially in this deck where we do have all these +1 counter synergies, it can, even if it's just protecting your commander itself, which with the cloning effects, a lot of the time you can treat it as a Voltron deck. You can, with all those clones, put the +1 counters onto your commander and just keep proliferating and have this massive flying, trampling mutant just swinging at people, which is great. And this allows you to protect it with the added value of drawing cards. So the value is kind of just twofold there, and it's a really good card with any type of +1 counter strategy. And then with the rest of the instance, you're going to want to run a decent amount of counter spells because since it kind of is 5 mana is a lot, and with any type of proliferate deck, you're going to need setup in the early game. You're going to want to throw some counter spells in there just in case an aggro deck is coming at you in the early game. You want to be able to kind of slow some other decks down and keep yourself alive. Moving on to the artifacts. The first one, Blade of Selves. This is, again, clones. Every time you swing, you're going to be getting extra clones, meaning extra +1 counters, meaning extra proliferate triggers. And because this is on the attack trigger, immediately, if you decide that your original commander is the one you want to keep, you can just throw all those counters onto there, throw all those proliferate triggers onto there, and in just one combat step, you just have this massive commander swinging at somebody with flying and trample. The next one I want to talk about is Everflowing Chalice, because I've mentioned other types of counters, and really up to this point, poison counters were the only ones I talked about. But with Everflowing Chalice, you could just cast it to where it just has 1 counter on it, but with the insane number of proliferate triggers we can get, you cast a few clones, all of a sudden this has 5, 6, however many counters you want, and it's tapping for a ton of mana, which again, if we end up letting our commander go to the command zone a few times, it can get expensive, but that won't matter, because if this thing's tapping for 10 mana by itself, that makes it a lot easier to pay commander tax. Now moving on to the enchantments, As Foretold. Speaking of counters, this is another card that has a different type of counter on it. Proliferating these counters, you're essentially just going to keep getting to cast a card for essentially free, and no matter how big of a CMC it is, because these counters will get just so fast, they'll get proliferated just to get out of hand. And the best part about this is it doesn't say cast from your hand, meaning you can use this to keep casting your commander, keep proliferating, and just keep letting things get out of hand. Now, the last enchantment, I had to talk about this. This is one of my favorite cards I've ever seen printed. It just makes me feel good, and it is Simic Ascendancy. Oh, in this deck, it is just so powerful, because not only with these clone triggers, with all these +1 counters being placed, that's already putting counters on this. Then we're going to proliferate, make more +1 counters to put more counters on this, but those proliferation triggers are also going to proliferate the counters that are on Simic Ascendancy. This seems like kind of one of those out there win cons in most decks. In this deck, if you get Simic Ascendancy out, the game can just end fast. Now moving on to the lands, there's two that I really do need to talk about. The first one's Alchemist Refuge. I've mentioned this in a couple previous deck techs. I really feel like any deck that I run blue and green this is in, it lets you play stuff at instant speed on a land that is so good, especially in this deck where we have stuff like a Simic Ascendancy where you kind of want to get your upkeep real sneakily with all those counters, being able to flash something in to get all those proliferate triggers, to get the counters you need. You want to be a little sneakier with it, so it's nice to be able to take your turn when you want to. So the last land I'm going to talk about is Inkmoth Nexus, and it's everything we want. I mentioned Infect, and to have this on a land is so good, not to mention that it's a 1/1 flyer. You just get to poke somebody with it. The worst it'll do is just kind of sneak in that little 1 infect damage so you can just proliferate like crazy to infect somebody out. But realistically, with all these +1 counters getting thrown around and all these proliferate triggers, not only will you just be able to buff it up and make it huge, but then afterwards you can proliferate whatever poison you do get through, and this can take somebody out so fast. So now moving on to, as you guys know, my favorite part, and especially with this deck, just such a fun part, and that is the game-winning step. And so how are we going to win the game? How are we going through and finishing off everybody and getting the win with this commander? And like I said, this has some fun ones. So the first way shouldn't be any surprise at all. I've mentioned it a few times, and it's Infect. Infect in this deck is so good, especially with cards like Blighted Agent and Inkmoth Nexus, basically flyers or things with evasion, or in the case of unblockable, and just sneaking in infect damage and then proliferating out of control, or proliferating +1 counters to make these infect creatures even bigger and then taking someone out. Kind of however you want to do it, whatever you're feeling like. So this, I love Infect. Again, it's just such a great way to, especially in a deck like this commander is nowhere near competitive. So you might have some decks that are very intimidating you're playing against. Using Infect, kind of just taking somebody out real quick, is a great way to level the playing field. The second way to win the game, I've also talked about, but I do really want to re-emphasize it because I love this card so much. It's Simic Ascendancy. This is just a great way to win the game in this deck. It's one of those, I know some people aren't a fan of just you win the game cards, but this is really one you do have to work for. And if you get some things in place, and maybe you're able to write a replication your commander with this out, and all of a sudden +1 counters and proliferations are going crazy, it's just such a cool way to win, and it's just so on flavor with the Simic deck. It's great. This is one of my favorite things about Commander, to be able to win in such an flavorful way, in such a convoluted way. It's a good time. And the last way I'm going to talk about to win the game is you can just Commander damage people out. I kind of briefly alluded to it, but you do have a flying trample creature as your commander that lets you proliferate, and with all these cloning effects, you can just throw all the +1 counters onto your commander and then just proliferate more and just end up with this massive flying trampling beast. And really, that's not a bad way to win, especially you throw some equipment on it. There's a lot of ways to get damage through, and you can just be taking out somebody fast. So having that built-in evasion and trample with all these effects, normally Voltron, especially in a deck that isn't completely geared towards Voltron, isn't a realistic way to take people out. But in this case, I really think it is. So that's going to do it with the ways to win the game. What I've noticed with this deck is there's a lot of ways to win the game. There's so much synergy that you end up just discovering ways to just do some crazy stuff you'd never really think about. And that's one of my favorite things about it. It just seems so varied. There's so many different things that can happen to put you in the direction you want to be in, and just finding different ways and using it. And the best part is it's all rooted in your commander and that ability. It's a really cool deck, and I really hope you guys give it a shot. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it's kind of a lesson for me to not just dismiss commanders like that. Again, I looked at it and kind of just, I have no interest. And until I really sat down and thought about it, I realized it could end up being a really fun commander. So with a lot of commanders in new sets, sometimes they might be underwhelming. You got to sit down and try your hardest to break them, and you never know that they could end up being one of your favorite commanders. But yes, please let me know in the comments cards I might be forgetting. Again, these are brand new commanders, so I would love suggestions. I really want to know how you guys feel about Roalesk. But make sure to check out the tapped out, check out the full deck list down below, and I will see you guys next time.